Hey, welcome to the online experience here at Bay Life Church. We're so thankful that you decided to join us. After 8 weeks in addressing the mess, we began a brand new series this weekend. It's kind of a truth project. It's a series that is going to send us in search of what truth is, what does it mean, to clarify its impact in our life. And that's really what we're going to do in week one. We're going to try to define truth and answer the question, what is truth? And then in the 3 weeks that follow, we're going to take on some statements that may seem true, feel true. We may even want them to be true, but they're not true. They're what I would call true-ish. So how do we define something that's true? It's statements that seem true, feel true. We want them to be true. They're just not true. And even if they're off by just a hair, an infinitesimal deviation from truth, over time, we're going to be far from God, far from home, and far from the clarity that comes with moral certainty. Well, this whole series is based upon a question that came out of a conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate. When Jesus was on trial for his life, Pontius Pilate had said, "So, you think that you're a king?" And Jesus said, "You've well said." In fact, he goes on to give greater clarification in John chapter 18. He says this, "In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth." That was the purpose of his life. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And then this amazing question, and it's been debated, was he sarcastic? Was he being sincere? Here's the main question that Pilate asked: what is truth? And that's such an important question, so critical for our life. It impacts so many things, and we desperately need to find the answer to that. Well, one might ask, why are we doing a series about truth? I mean, don't we all just kind of get that? Well, there are really two reasons. One's a practical one, and one's a philosophical one. The practical reason that we're talking about truth right now is that's in part how we use our summers here at Bay Life. Going forward, we use summers to have family conversations. We talk about things that are going to make us more effective in reaching our community for Christ so that the people of the Bay communities might find and follow God. So we know how to handle truth because truth is really the product that we're trying to give away. Right? As we evangelize people so that they might find and follow God, it's all about truth. So the second, or the philosophical reason, is because I think it's what's dividing our country. Some might say, well, it's really politics that's dividing our country. Do you wear a red hat or a blue hat? Some might even say it's personalities and powerful personalities. What LeBron James says, or what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle say, and that's somehow dividing us. Or maybe it's just pure polemics, right? That we just like to argue. Well, I don't think it's any of those things, really. I think that our country is divided over this issue, over what is the truth and what does truth mean. So as we launch into this series, probably fair for me to kind of tell you what my primary propositional truths are. This is what I believe, or what the facts that I assume to be in evidence. I want to give you two of them. Propositional truth number one is this: what you believe determines how you behave. And we could spend a lot of time proving that, but let's just assume it to be true since this is a family conversation, right? I believe that what you believe determines how you behave relationally, how you behave financially, how you behave morally, and even spiritually. And let me add that what we believe and how we behave spiritually determines what happens to us in this life, but also in what comes after this life. Propositional truth number two is this: Jesus came into the world to testify of the truth. I believe that. I assume that to be true. Isn't that what we found out when we looked at John 18? It says, in fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to truth. This is his primary purpose. Let's also know and assume that if Jesus came to testify to the truth, there is a counter spiritual being known by many names: Satan, the devil, the prince of the air, the angel of light. And he is counter to everything that is true. In fact, this is what the scripture says about him. It says, the devil was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he's speaking his native language, right? For he is a liar and the father of lies. Now, what kind of lies does Satan tell us? Well, he's not going to tell you bold lies or things that seem false on their face. No, he's cunning. He's deceitful. He's going to tell you something that feels true, seems true. You may even want it to be true. It's just not true. It's true-ish, right? It's just 2 degrees off from truth, but he knows that over time that seed will bear fruit and we will find ourselves so far from home and without the peace that comes from living life with moral clarity. Well, what is culture's reaction to this? As you get trained over the course of this series to learn how to handle truth and you go out and begin to speak truth to people in culture, what do you think their response is going to be? Well, it's probably one of 2 things. They're either going to think you're arrogant, right? That suddenly you have the truth, or probably more commonly in cancel culture world, they're going to think you're dangerous and they're going to cancel you, okay? So just being aware of that up front. In fact, Scripture is really clear about not only the importance of truth, but the veracity of truth. So knowing that you're going to go into a culture that's hostile to truth, I want to put some bullets in your gun, right? I want to give you some things for your philosophical arsenal as you go into the world to help people find and follow God. I want to take this from unpacking a few truths from Romans chapter 1. You see, our culture isn't the only culture that's anti-truth. This has happened down through the centuries, and it was certainly true in the first century AD when the Apostle Paul was doing ministry. So let's go to Romans 1. I want to read a handful of verses. It says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people, notice this, who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. The author goes on, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now, in this introductory message, I have so much to cover and limited amount of time, so we're going to kind of compress our comments on the text, but not to depreciate at all the grave importance of this particular text. But I want to share 3 profound truths. We're going to lift them right out of the text. Truth number 1 about our culture and how it relates to truth is suppressing the truth is the default action of every generation. Isn't that what the Apostle Paul said? People who suppress the truth by their wickedness. We all do it. We suppress the truth for several reasons, right? Out of self-protection because of the guilt I feel when I'm exposed to truth, or self-indulgence because I want to keep on sinning, or self-direction because I want to be the captain of my own ship and direct my own life. But all of us are suppressing the truth. In fact, culture suppresses the truth as well, right? Led by the political class, the press, the big tech, educational elites. Everyone has joined together right now to suppress truth. It's just what people do. The second truth I'd lift out of the paragraph is this one. Truth is real, and it's real obvious. Look what the text says. Since what may be known about God, that's truth, is plain to them because God has made it plain. There is a source of truth. His name is God. And he has gone throughout the vastness of his universe, through the microcosm and complexity of biology, the beauty of art. Everywhere he has placed evidence that truth is real and that truth can be known and understood. There's one third warning light about how our culture and every culture responds to truth. Here's the third truth. People are without excuse because the truth is plain. Isn't that what it says in the text? Having been clearly seen, being understood from what's been made, so that people are without excuse. You see, just because you want to disobey the truth or you want to ignore the truth does not mean that you're not accountable to the truth. Couple of things that you need to know, big cultural shifts that have happened over the last 250, 300 years. The big two, the first one is what we would call relativism. This is a big enemy of truth. It's the assumption that there is no such thing as absolute truth. And just saying there's no such thing as absolute truth is, of course, a statement of absolute truth. You're saying there is absolutely no absolute truth. So it's kind of false on its head. But relativism, I want you to know, has been widely accepted. It basically said truth is up for grabs. It moves and shifts. It's malleable. Truth can be changed. Well, how does truth get changed? Well, back in my seminary days, we studied a German philosopher named Hegel, who in the late 1700s, early 1800s, came up with something called the Hegelian dialectic. Now, that is way simpler than it sounds. Let me just walk you through it, right? He taught that a thesis, or we'll just say a truth statement, plus an antithesis, or something counter to that truth, when those two meet or collide, it forms a truth synthesis, right? You get a new truth. That's how truth morphs, right? Let me show you a more modern historical example of this. In the 50s, I think it would be safe to say that here in America, we still thought, in large part, that marriage was kind of a sacred institution, right? Well, then the 60s came along, and it was a turbulent time in our country, and it was all about free sex, drugs, rock and roll. And so what happened is we have the thesis that marriage is a sacred institution. It collides with something counter to that says that you can have the benefits of marriage without the trappings of the institution. You can have sex without marriage. And so then in the 70s and 80s, what happens? The value of marriage devolves. It forms into a synthesis, right? There's kind of a new truth. And if we were to say, what did the world think the new truth was? It's, well, marriage may not be a sacred institution, but it is a useful institution. Well, then we have a resurgence of relativism, that truth can morph and move and is malleable in the 80s and 90s for sure. I mean, relativism was on the rise. And so what happened by the time we got into this century, marriage has gone from a sacred institution to a useful institution to, I don't think it's really necessary anymore. In fact, marriage is actually taken the subordinate position in culture, where there are literally more people who move in together and cohabitate than people who get married to start life together. It's flipped. Marriage is in the subordinate position. So we've gone from sacred institution to useful institution to an unuseful institution, because the thinking is marriage can lead to divorce. Living together doesn't lead to divorce, so marriage isn't very useful. So you can see how in the mind of men, now truth never changed, let me just say that right up front, but human thinking, relative, or thinking that's affected by relativism, shows a depreciation in the value of marriage. And many would say truth changed. So what is relativism? Let's define it one more time. Relativism says truth is not constant, it evolves. Well, there's a second enemy of truth, and that is subjectivism. It's the belief that I have the right to determine what's right and wrong without submitting my judgment to any authority outside myself. It's since truth moves, I get to decide what truth is. Now, this first came into prominence in my generation, right? Kind of boomers and busters. And the way that it first showed itself, we began saying things like, we'll just agree to disagree, as if there might be two versions of truth, right? And then the Gen X generation started saying things like, well, you have your truth and I have my truth, where we actually declared there were two different truths. And now the millennial and the Gen Z generations just say this: you do you, right? You do you. We don't even have to talk about our differences because our differences are irrelevant. We're just all doing what's right in our own sight. And so when we get into subjectivism, it's really dangerous ground, and we begin to say and think things like this: well, as long as it makes me happy, it must be okay. Or it doesn't really matter what I believe as long as I'm sincere in my belief. Or even as long as I don't hurt anyone else, it really doesn't matter how I live my life, right? It seems right, feels right. We may even want it to be right, but it's not right, it's not true, it's true-ish, right? It's a deviation. It matters not how big a deviation, because we know that time plus the seed of deviation leads us to a really, really bad place. Wow. Now, that's what's going on in culture, and I'm sure that without me giving you a half a dozen illustrations, you can pick them out. You can see that that's what's going on. And you know that when you begin to address those things, because as we share truth, people are going to be offended at truth. They're going to think that you're arrogant. They're going to think that you're dangerous, maybe. They may try to cancel you. It's going to feel awkward, and the temptation would be to retreat. Well, I'll just get in my little holy huddle. I'll hide out here at Bay Life Church and be part of the Bay Life family, and I don't really have to address all that. They can just go doing their own thing. Well, the problem is that just as Jesus said his purpose was to come here to testify to truth, he's made it our purpose, that we're to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We're to testify to the truth. So as we wrap things up, I want us to kind of imagine for a moment. Imagine that truth is real. Imagine that truth is knowable. Imagine that you could experience truth, and its experience is consistent every time. That when I'm in alignment with truth, I experience blessing. And when I'm out of alignment with truth, I experience pain. And if I know that to be true, and I've experienced that to be consistently true, then it's easier to be an evangelist for the truth, because we know that truth is real, that its experience is consistent, and that allows us to understand how to best share truth with others. Well, what do we need to know if we're going to testify to the truth? Well, I'm going to make it super simple in this message. Just two things. The first thing that we need to know about the truth is this: truth is not just a what, but a who. You see, if it were just a collection of philosophical statements, if it were just about a series of propositions, maybe I'm not interested. Maybe I don't ever clearly understand what it's about. But if truth is not just a what, but a who, now I have a living example. Now I have someone whose teaching, whose decisions, whose behavior I can emulate and so align myself with truth. Jesus claims to be the who, right? In John's gospel, it says this, John 14:6, Jesus answered, I am the way, check this out, the truth and the life. He said, I'm the embodiment of truth. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus said, I'm the who. I am the very definition and the emulation of truth, the truth that comes from God Himself. In fact, there's kind of a seminal passage in John chapter 1 where He describes this fact. He says, in the beginning was the Word. This is referring to Jesus. The Word was with God in eternity past. The Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. He goes on, we have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, check this out, full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. Now, I know that what I'm about to say may seem a bit controversial, but I've tested it and found it to be true. I think if you would take any one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, my recommendation would be John, and you read through it and you study the life and teaching and decisions of Jesus, and you see that He loved the marginalized, He healed the sick, He fed the hungry, He cared about the poor, He taught what it meant to love God and love others. I think there's only one single solitary conclusion you would come to as you study His life, and that is that it is a beautiful life. Understand this, Bay Life family. When we go out as emissaries of the truth, I think it's safe to say that people are never going to reject Jesus as the source of truth because of His life. If they are tempted to reject truth that comes from Jesus, it's not what He's done, what He's decided, how He's conducted Himself. No, it's probably how those who claim to follow Him have conducted themselves. You know, when I was growing up here in the South, churches that I was exposed to, I would describe them this way. They were full of truth with no grace. And that leads to legalism and judgmentalism, and that turns people off. It turned me off. It was one of the reasons I didn't want to pastor in the South, why I spent the last 30 plus years pastoring in kind of secular metropolitan cities, because I didn't want to be around that. But in those secular cities, you know what I discovered with, unfortunately, many churches there? They were full of grace and no truth. And that leads to subjectivism. That leads to wandering far afield from the truth that is Jesus. So if we will play it down the middle, if we will simply elevate Jesus and point to His life, His teaching, His decisions, how He related to people, if we keep their eyes on that, it's going to be hard for them to be disagreeable about the truth. Well, why would we make Jesus the only focus? Well, here's the second thing you need to know about truth. It's that Jesus, the truth, can set you free. That's how people find and follow God. That's how we experience life change, any of us, is that we become exposed to Jesus and He can set us free. He tells us so in John 8:32. He says, then you will know the truth, you'll know Jesus, and the truth will set you free. Set you free from what? Set you free from sin and its penalties. Set you free from all the losses that you might otherwise have if you believe things that are true-ish. Well, I know that you know people who have bought into relativism. You know people who have bought into subjectivism. They may be family. They may be friends. They may be workmates. And I want you to begin thinking now about crafting those conversations as God opens the door to have conversations that are redemptive with family and friends and workmates, even this summer. And we're going to point them to Jesus because Jesus is the truth, right? Because the truth is a who, not just a what. Knowing that if they know Jesus, they will know truth, and the truth will set them free. It's going to be a fun series. I want you to show up every week. If you're not able to be in town, when you're on vacation, be on vacation. When you're in town, be here at Bay Life. And if you are out of town, please go to our app, go to our website, and listen to the talks each week. This is going to be a life-changing series in the life of the Bay Life family. Love you so much. Know this, God loves you even more. We look forward to being with you next week.